I'm excited, Bloodborne fans. Welcome to episode 90 of an ongoing series where we basically take the camera anywhere we want and we try to find secrets and new discoveries to some of our favorite games. So Bloodborne, man, this was highly requested and I just never thought it'd be possible. This in fact marks the very first PlayStation 4 exclusive game on Boundary Break, and we have every bit of that to thank to Lance McDonald, who runs a channel that has a ton of Bloodborne content. In fact, a lot of stuff that you're not going to end up seeing here, so make sure you stay tuned till the end of the episode so I can show you a short preview of what you can see over on his channel. But you know what I want to do first. Let's get started on the Bloodborne episode of Boundary Break. So the first thing I want to talk about is where various enemies are before they appear, and the first one we want to talk about is the Cleric Beast. As you can see, it jumps in front of the player from somewhere off screen, but where off screen would it be? Now in most cases when you look behind the scenes in certain games there will be nothing there, it will be loaded in, but you'll be happy to find out if you take the camera behind the wall in this scene you will find the Cleric Beast back there, as the Cleric Beast is loaded in at all times and is just stuck and hidden behind this wall. Now in a different and related fashion, this boss that a lot of players should be very familiar with transforms into a beast at the final portion of the battle. And what's awesome is that despite the fact that that beast form doesn't happen until later into the fight, it's in the map at all times. In fact, that form is stored way underneath the map, waiting to be warped in position at the right moment. And the same can be said for the Colossal Emissary boss. Down below the battle arena you can see this beautiful boy just waiting for his turn to show up once you bust a few noggins of the smaller guys. And as for the last featured hidden enemy, about halfway through the Forbidden Woods we meet the Forest Beggar.
The place is falling apart once again. It's the curse of Yharnam.
After we're done talking to him, we'll go out of bounds, and there will be an abhorrent beast floating in the map somewhere close to him. And this is because if we attack the beggar enough times, the abhorrent beast in fact warps in and takes his place for the fight. And as a little extra treat, Man-Fight Dragon turned off his AI so that we can get a good close look at him. Which is something I always come to appreciate in a From Software game, since you always have to be on the moves, and you can't stop to smell the roses and appreciate just how detailed these enemy models are. This next segment is going to be called What's Behind the NPC Doors and Windows. And the first one we're going to be looking at is if you try to return to the room where the game began, you can discover a woman named Yosefka, who is extremely friendly.
Then I'm very sorry, but I cannot open this door.
But won't let you back in. And if we were to no-clip behind this door, you can see that she's completely modeled and you can talk to her on the other side of the door.
Are you still in need of something?
You can even open the door from the other side, and attacking her has the same effect in dialogue as if you were attacking the locked door.
Stop! Oh. Please, stop.
But anyways, moving on from that, right near the beginning of the game, you can meet a character behind the window named Gilbert, who guides the player through the first two acts of the game. Here, Lance took a look inside of his house after having a conversation with him, which is a little more detailed than we expected. Later in the game, his window does break open though, so that explains why it does have a little texture to work with on the inside. And if you arrive at the Hunter's Dream before you lit any of the lanterns, which you can do by dying to the first enemy, the workshop doors are closed. And some folks on Twitter asked if Jermaine was waiting on the inside before you're allowed to go in, and the answer is no. He's nowhere to be found. And what's kind of odd is as soon as you no-clip into the workshop, the doors are all open. You still have a closed prompt when you go near them, but they're all open now.
If you find any survivors, tell them to seek Yosefka's clinic.
And not long into the game, Yosefka is replaced with an imposter with a different voice. She still stays behind the door and refuses to let you in, but this time she's holding a weapon. And if we no-clip too far past the door, it progresses her quest to the next stage instantly, and spawns the creatures she's secretly creating in there. And just to remove the curiosity, throughout all of Yharnam, there's lots of doors you can knock on to speak to citizens. And of course, we want to just see if there's anything behind those doors, and in this case, there isn't a whole lot, as in a lot of cases you'll find nothing. And lastly, there is one NPC in the Forbidden Woods you can see through the cracks of their house, and when we take a look at them, it's more or less just a typical Yharnam enemy. Now Lance has a section for me here completely dedicated to the moon. And we'll start off with this clip here. The moon in the Hunter's Dream is one of the more realistic looking ones. In fact, it appears to be a completely flat billboard floating in the air, rather than being part of the Skybox. which now that I recall isn't the first time I've seen that in a video game. Anyways, while we're here, let's appreciate a closer look at these pillars floating in the rolling fog, and how teeny tiny the Hunter's Dream looks out here. Next up in Bergenworth, we can run from the Lunarium and see that the moon is a complete sphere, and we can also see how massive the whole lake is, as well as the hills in the distance, which in fact are real polygons. They're not flat textures like you think they would be for the distance that they're at. And in the Nightmare of Mensis, we can get such a close look that you could even stick your head inside of it. So throughout the game, messengers pop out and deliver items or guidance to the player. But when they go back into the ground, where do they go? Unfortunately, they mostly disappear, but the ones that are at the headstones can be seen flashing underneath the ground before you unlock them. Which also, bonus thing, you can see that there's nothing rendered below the waist of these messengers. And Lance also tested the underground messengers a bit more and found that if they pop up to offer you an item, there's always at least one that stays underground stuck in a funny pose. And when you first arrive to Old Yarnum, many players notice that there's a statue just randomly floating in the air. And it appears to in fact be two statues clipping into each other, which is surprisingly similar to the goof left behind in Dark Souls 1 with the window hanging in the air. But anyways, in Old Yarnum we can find an old church with beast patients worshipping a huge dead blood-starved beast, which naturally we got up close and set it on fire and just checked to see if the flaming body can hurt us, which turns out it doesn't. And in the lowest part of Old Yarnum, we can find a locked door, which much later in the game you can open up to the other side after defeating a dark beast Parl. However, if you open up that door as early as possible, the dark beast is waiting for you on the other side. And even though it's impossible to enter this room from the other side, the boss fight still begins. And while we're here, we can get a nice good close-up of him as well. And moving on from that, the Wandering Madness usually runs away when you get close. And just like before, let's get a good close-up of this enemy since it's so hard to get a good look at them. If you go beneath the Grand Cathedral and look inside the statue on the far end, you can see another copy of the statue inside it. This is because in the cutscene where Vicar Amelia appears, we can see the statue get splattered with blood, and the way that this effect is achieved is by swapping out the two models very quickly. Although, funny enough, after the cutscene ends, the statue doesn't have any blood on it anymore. Arriving at Hemwick Charnel Lane, a lot of people notice that to the left of the entrance is a fenced off path with a tunnel at each end. And so naturally we're going to fly up and take a look here, and I guess there's nothing through them, although you can see the backside of the orphanage if you go through one of them. And after you kill the Witch of Hemwick, you can come to this strange small room where you can find the Rune Workshop tool. And if you were to get on top of the roof, you could walk on it, meaning that for some reason there's collision up here. Alright, so let's do a little bit of sequence breaking. Usually the massive doors leading into Yahagul won't open until the game's final act, after we kill Rom. But what if we no-clipped through the door before we killed Rom and broken the ritual secret? Well, there's no enemies at all, no Pale, no Blood Sky, not a thing all over the wall shooting lasers at us. The whole area is empty, quiet and serene. And just how big is the Moonside Lake? Well, you'd be surprised to find out it's pretty freaking huge, especially at the end when you can see the entire area. And this one is especially interesting. So there's this cramped casket enemy hiding inside of this coach thing that pops out at you. Now normally as a player you can only see the enemy pop out at you, but if you were to take the camera inside of the casket, you can see that he's posed in a special way to fit inside the box. It even has its own animation loop, which again is not supposed to be seen by the player in any sort of way. And lastly, for curiosity's sake, we want to take the camera behind the wall in Yahar-Gul. Now apart from some unique brickwork, there's not too much to see here. Now Lance thought that you guys would find this pretty interesting, so I'm going to showcase this here. This next section is called Bosses Up Close. Like for example, we got Vicar Amelia here, and she does in fact hold her pendant in her hand throughout the entire fight, as well as the Shadows of Yarnum that when you take a much closer look, it's much easier to see that they have bodies and heads and kind of a face and mouth. And the one Reborn where he's actually two separate entities stuck together. A small body is riding a larger creature, and oddly enough, flying up and just attacking the head part does a lot more damage. And the last thing we're going to be looking at is low poly distance models. You can see Castle Cainhurst off in the distance here, and if you were to go right up to it, you can see it's a low poly version, of course. But calling this low poly is not giving it a lot of credit here, because despite the distance that it's at, it's pretty detailed, with heaps of buildings that are modeled that you'd never be able to see, which again is very much like the Dark Souls 1 episode where there was an entire town completely masked in fog despite the fact that it just had a ton of buildings. From Hemwick, you can also see the skyline of the Cathedral Ward, which is also pretty detailed when you get up close. A lot of the parts that you can't see are in fact fully rendered, including the face of the Astral Clock Tower. And if we take a look at the church that leads to Yahar-Gul, you can see the city skyline behind it. This is the only place in the entire game that Lance found where the models aren't low poly but are surprisingly entirely flat billboards. which no doubt in my mind, if the devs from Software couldn't make a low poly model off in the distance, it must have been out of necessity. Because of all the games I cover on this show, From Software loves to put the most amount of detail they can put into the distance as they can. And before we head down into the Forbidden Woods, you can see the woods and windmills in the distance. But if we fly over to them, we can see that the woods are pretty low detail. And if we keep running, we can find little islands with buildings on them, which we can never reach in game. Obviously, you should never be too hard on this fact, but if you pay attention, you might notice that these are reused buildings from Old Yarnum. They're just mashed up, rotated, and smashed together. There's also floor areas that are just random mixed up textures. Now, you would never be able to see this from where we came from, so it's weird that it's even rendered here. And we got a low poly of the starting area, and it's made pretty accurately. The scale of it is the same as the actual starting area. And of course, a lot of you know that in the Forbidden Woods, we can see the university off in the distance. So let's get a good close look at that. In the game's final area, the Nightmare Mensis, you can't stand out in the open because a terribly rotten Great One is watching and shoot these spikes to inflict frenzy on you and probably kill you. But with no clip and disabling enemy AI, we can go right up to it and get a good look at it. You do get a decent look at it later on when you drop it into the dark pit, but you never really get to see it as clearly as this. And just to clarify, a lot of people like to call this the brain of Mensis. However, the in-game text refers to it as the terribly rotten Great One. So in the Celestial Emissary, there is an unused elevator shaft. Most of it still remains, but the entrance and exit to this elevator shaft is sealed up with wall textures. As you just saw, Lance went through the wall to find the elevator shaft, and it's not until you get over into this area that the elevator is supposed to reach the bottom. But now it's not only covered up by a wall, but it's some statues as well. Hey, thank you guys very much for watching. First thing I gotta get out of the way is you have to check out Lance's channel. He did a ton of work on this episode, and it's not even for that reason alone. It's such an easy transition from this video to one of his videos. He does a whole bunch of unused content, which none of that was featured on this episode because it wasn't specifically boundary breaking. He was actually restoring stuff to Bloodborne, which I just find is incredibly cool. I wouldn't recommend this video if I didn't watch it myself, so definitely check it out. And if you're new to my channel, hey, how's it going? And you don't have to subscribe just yet. There's 2 other videos you can check out to see if this is right for you. We got Dark Souls 1 and Dark Souls 3, which I'm gonna put on the screen. I think it's gonna be like this way. Watch me be completely wrong. But yeah, just check those videos out, see if you like them, and, you know, awesome, man. Thanks for checking my stuff out. And to people who've been watching my channel for a while, hopefully next episode is going to be Super Mario Odyssey. If it's not, it's totally because the tools weren't made in time, but it's definitely coming really soon, so try to get excited if you happen to be both a Nintendo and a Bloodborne fan. Anyways, guys, I'll see you next week. Take care. Bye.